Welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Show, where our mission is to inspire, impact, and influence other immigrant entrepreneurs to create the future they want. My guest today is a podcaster himself, by the way. He is the host of the Wayfinder Show, Luis Hernandez. Luis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ali. I'm really happy to be here.
And I'm excited to have someone on the other side, actually, who is a podcaster himself. So not only for that reason, I'm expecting this to be a great interview. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
So, Luis, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from originally, your parents, and where are you based right now also?
Yeah, I'm currently based in Denver, Colorado, in the United States. Been here about 15 years almost, and but I'm originally from the East Coast of the United States. Was born in Providence, Rhode Island. I spent my young years in New York City, in Queens, New York, and then a town called Central Falls, Rhode Island, which is right outside of Providence. And my parents, they immigrated to the United States from Colombia, and in the 70s, and at the time, Colombia, South America. And then, at the time that they immigrated here, having a child here, I think, allowed them to get a visa and stay past their tourist visa. So I kind of gave my parents permission to stay in the United States at that time. That law doesn't apply anymore, but it worked back then, I understand. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So, Luis, what was your upbringing like? Do you come from money and,
Oh, yeah, well, filthy rich. Yeah. No, quite the opposite, actually, Ali. My family moved here like most immigrants who come to the United States. They come here because they're looking for a better way of life, right? This is supposed to be the land of opportunity. Colombia in the 70s was in the beginning of what it's kind of now known for, right? All of the drug wars and what have you, lots of violence and everything. Although, I shouldn't say it's not known for. Colombia is doing very well. It's cleaned up a lot, and Colombia is a great country again. Thank goodness. But at the time, they were both fleeing basically from the beginning of of the infamous cartel era that eventually started in the 80s and 90s. Really became prominent then. My mother was born and raised in a coffee farm, and she was one of 9. And when her father passed away, all the kids quit school in like elementary school, and they worked the farm. And at that time, the guerrillas were coming to the farmers and saying, "Hey, we want you to grow these seeds, and rather than the brown coffee, we want you to grow this white stuff, and you can either do it and get paid really well, or we're just going to take your land and you're not going to get anything." So they sold the farm and just moved to the city of Medellin, Colombia, and they all worked hard to try and make a better life for themselves. And my mother, who was the most enterprising, was sent first to the United States in hopes of her, finding a way to send money back to the family and helping them all get ahead. And on my father's side, I think he did come from a pretty prominent family, but he was kind of the black sheep and took off and came here and started his own way. They both worked factory jobs and cleaning jobs and, all of the low wage entry level jobs that you get here in the States. They lived in a lot of immigrant enclaves where there were immigrants from all backgrounds, all areas of the world where people come to the United States to. Like when I lived in Queens, New York, that was the neighborhood was Jackson Heights, Queens. And in Jackson Heights, it was all immigrant. I mean, I remember a lot of Cuban, Jewish, Italian, Indian, and almost every street was a different, flavor, I should say, nationality that made it up. But definitely, and obviously Colombians, a lot of Colombians. Queens, as a matter of fact, at that time, and I think it might still be true, held the largest Colombian Independence Day festival in the world at Flushing Meadow Park in Queens at that time. So, which was interesting, even bigger than the ones in Colombia. I don't know if that's still true. And where we lived in Rhode Island, same thing. Central Falls, Rhode Island is a factory town. People there were from all walks of life. A lot of Latin American, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Guatemalan, and a lot of people from Cape Verde Islands, Portugal, and Syria were the primary nationalities that I remember. But we all would get together, and it was one big melting pot. Yeah,
Very interesting.
so
So and then tell me how you got how you got into your let's call it professional life and working jobs and making
sure.
money and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was the first to go to college in my family. I was actually the first to even graduate high school in my family. I went to Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, and that kind of got me out and exposed me to middle and upper class lifestyles. Got me my first job, which was for the Boy Scouts of America. But while I was there, I went to go rent an apartment halfway through my school years, and I needed to use a realtor. And in talking to them, I realized, hey, they made about a month's worth of commission for an apartment. At that time, that was a lot of money to me. And so I thought, oh, well, what could I do for that? And so I got my real estate license and started just renting apartments in Boston. And that really exposed me to real estate. And from there, with my first job for the Boy Scouts, they moved us to Baltimore, and there I saw a lot of empty, boarded up apartment, just houses that were boarded up. And I remember coming in to Baltimore and getting lost in the neighborhoods and seeing those, and it didn't scare me. It actually got me excited. I'm like, wow, this is an opportunity. Like, these places can be fixed up and look nice. And sure enough, started looking into that and started, found out that they were pretty affordable, and we looked to figure out how to buy them, and we started buying them and fixing them up. And the goal for many years was the business became just buying them, fixing them, and selling them to first-time homeowners so they can move into these neighborhoods and, turn them around. Because as we know, when a homeowner moves into a neighborhood, they're much more likely to take care of it and improve the neighborhood. So I was looking at it for, of course, making money, but also trying to turn the neighborhoods around that were like that. And that went really well from about 2001, 2002 to 2008. And if you remember, in 2008, we had a big financial crisis, and that kind of forced me to leave. We lost everything at that time, and I had to dissolve the business for a while. So from there, I went back to grad school, got my MBA, just started committing myself to learning more about business, about market cycles, about real estate, all that, and eventually went back in mostly as a broker and started brokering, houses, building a team, and then commercial real estate, working with developers, selling multifamily buildings and commercial buildings, land for development, assembling land for building big buildings on and such. So yeah, just about anything to do with real estate. I think I've done it.
So Luis, I would love to ask you a question right here.
Yeah.
And then I explain why I'm asking this question. With what you know today, what happened to your business back then in 2008? What would you do different today in order to avoid what happened then?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question, and one I've spent probably the last 15 years thinking about. I first of all, what I did back then was flipping, essentially, right? You buy, fix, sell. And when you do that, you're creating inventory, right? And now when you start to understand business well, you understand inventory is not good, right? You don't want to hold inventory. That's why, like, the most successful manufacturing companies in the world now, they do what's called just-in-time inventory. They, as soon as it's bought, they have the inventory and have it out the door, right? Because carrying that stuff costs money, lots of money. So I didn't understand that, right? So I went all in. I got very good at this, and I was doing 3, 4 at a time, and the inventory accumulates. Then before you know it, I have, I'm holding 20 properties to sell, and that's how I set myself up for it, was to sell. So that's a lot of carrying costs. It's very expensive. I would not have done that again. And just about anybody I knew who was flipping at that time, they all went through the same thing I did. Flipping is good when the market is liquid, meaning you can take it and you can easily sell it. But there's times when it's not very liquid. Real estate doesn't always, you can't just hit a button on your phone and sell the shares like you can stock, right? Sometimes it takes time and there's no buyers for something. So which has happened, right now it's happening in certain asset classes. And so what I would do different, understanding that, is I would have a better buy and hold position. I tried to do this when I realized that these properties weren't gonna sell as much as well. I attempted to rent them out to homeowners, but I was not a good property manager. I wasn't good at screening people. I bought these in a lot of areas that were really bad areas, and so the tenants they attracted were, not the best tenants. They were war zones, high violence, high drug traffic, very, very similar to the neighborhoods I grew up in, which made me feel comfortable being in them. But I didn't realize, the type of tenant, doesn't often pay rent, and so, um, so those are the kind of things. And I learned a lot of things the hard way, which was I I rented to people I probably shouldn't have rented to, and they just did enough to get in there because I was desperate, needing some money to keep the places afloat, and then they would never pay again. And then it took me months to get them out. And once they did leave, the places were trash. Oftentimes I'd have to reinvest in getting them back and going. I had one where they ripped out all of the copper pipes inside of the place. So it wasn't just the plumbing, but all the walls and everything was all beat up. So, I mean, it was worse than when I first got it, So these are the kind of things I learned the hard way from that. I wasn't built for it. So if I were to do it again, I would not be, I would be more cognizant of where the market is going, so I understand what the liquidity would be like if I'm flipping. If I'm not flipping, I would be looking at trying to buy and hold in more stable neighborhoods. Your classic middle class neighborhoods. The not too high, not too low. Something between where the 20 to 80% of the population lies, right? So what is that? Is probably going to be a nice suburban neighborhood with good schools, type of thing, because there's always going to be good families that want those kind of properties to rent, and they usually have jobs and they can afford to pay it easily, and so then they can I would be able to hold and be able to withstand that storm that comes when there's major like black swans in an economy.
Right. Okay. So one last question in regards to this, and then we will move on. With what you know today, and thinking of yourself back then, do you think was it any kind of limiting belief that was holding you back from getting to this asset class that you would call something in an environment that you would want to buy and hold and rent out? But you said it was more affordable. But we all know if you have your funding structured, and if you have a knowledge about what you're doing, then the funding becomes secondary, right? Because
That's right.
money wants a good deal, right? So
That's right.
do you think that was related to your upbringing, limiting belief, money relationship that you had, or anything like this?
100%, Ali. I definitely do. I think money was the number one limiting belief, and maybe to an extent it still is. The numbers always scared me and directed everything. So if I looked at a place and it was only $10,000, which were real numbers back then, like you could buy properties for $10,000, and or 20,000 or whatever, that I felt very comfortable with that number, and so that's why I went for it. Rather than, like you said, going into a middle class neighborhood and spending $200,000-300,000. At that time, that was probably what a middle class neighborhood was in Baltimore. And having a good quality asset that I can, would have withstood any storm. So that's definitely, it was definitely a limiting belief. And now I'm quite the opposite, right? I only look at if it's in a, I classify neighborhoods when I'm looking at for investments. I passed on a really good apartment building in Colorado Springs recently. It was a 16 unit building. Great deal. I loved it. Only reason why I passed on it was directly behind some housing projects, and it was just an area, they had cameras all over and whatnot. And I'm just like, I don't want to go through
Mm.
this stuff again, even though it was a great deal. And now the numbers you know, aren't what they used to be. This was still going to be in about a $2 million building. So, but it didn't scare me now. The numbers don't scare me. It's more like the risk is what scares me more. What can withstand a perfect storm, right? So um, that's kind of what I look at. Right now, we have an economy where multifamily is being delivered at a really high rate between now and probably the next 2 to 3 years. So you're starting to see rents dropping. Owners are giving all kinds of great incentives. So what that's forcing is like the Class A buildings are having to rent out at Class B prices, and that all trickles down. So like this building that I was looking at was a Class C building. Well, that means I would have gotten like, really the tenants of last resort, as we can say.
Mm.
And by the way, I was talking to the tenants when I toured the building, and there were two sex offenders that lived in that building. They've been
Oh.
there for years. They live there because they can't find another place to live, and not
Mm.
that they don't deserve another chance. And, I don't know what their offense was. I have no idea, but the owner declared that to me while we were walking it, so I don't want to make judgment, but I just don't want to deal with those issues anymore that come with that. What
Right.
if it was, a child sex offender, and then I have to deal with having, the repercussions of that, right? They did something in my
Mm.
apartment building. It's just not something I want to deal with anymore. So I'd rather figure out how to raise capital for a better building where I'm attracting better tenants, that are stable and can withstand any storm, rather than get a cheap building, right?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
yeah.
Right. Thank you. So going back to 2009, 2008, and pretty much losing everything you had built up. How did you move through that phase of your life, and how did you keep pushing through without losing faith? Faith not in, not in religion related topic, but faith in, I can move on, I can build something, and I can stay positive.
Yeah. Ali, the truth is I probably did lose faith. I
Mm.
became very not a very great person. We lost our home and everything. I had my dream home in a great neighborhood in a great in Baltimore City, and I had a 1 and a 3-year-old. And as a father and provider for the family, that's probably the biggest failure you can feel as a human, right? As a father,
Mm.
and as a man, I think, we can get beat up and punched in the face, whatever, but if we're not providing for our family, here we are.
Right.
I don't think there's a greater loss,
Mm.
a greater feeling of failure. So yeah, that I did lose a lot of faith. The truth is, I think because I wanted to be around for my kids, I hung on, but I don't know if I would have otherwise. I mean, it just was, it was hard. I started drinking a lot. I did go back to my first job for the Boy Scouts of America, um, and that's kind of because I had to. I couldn't find any other way to make income, but it was very little compared to what I was used to. I went back, and I think I was making 30,000 a year, where I had many years of making, well over a quarter million a year and having net worth north of 7 figures, and that was very humbling. But it also gave me a purpose, something to do, co-workers to shoot the breeze with, and while they all complained, I'm just grateful to be able to have something, to some kind of purpose. And the other thing that did it for me was, I got into running in
Mm.
2010. I went to go visit my family in Rhode Island, and then halfway there I went to go visit friends in Queens, and one of them I hadn't seen many years since college, since university. He was running a marathon, and I was intrigued. I never knew anybody who was doing that, and I asked him about it, and he gave me a book called The Non-Runners Marathon Training, and it's a book that's actually based on a class, I think, out of University of Idaho, where the students have to run a marathon as their final exam. And it does the book as like a journal where every week everybody does, they tell them what the training is and they journal as to how they feel about it. So I started following it, and it gave me something to do and pursue and what have you. And eventually, long story short, I ran a marathon. It was in 2010, the Philadelphia Marathon. And that got me started on a long journey of running that has taught me a lot of the lessons to come back, right? Like learning how to getting up from your failures, surrounding myself with smarter people than me that'll help me foresee things, that I may have not, building discipline, learning humility, all kinds of great soft skills that you learn in life. And then, after that, I went back to school, got my MBA. That helped me learn a lot more about business and business cycles and what have you, and then just get back at it. I did have a corporate career in between, and at one point they offered me a severance. I could have gone to the main office and had a higher corporate job, but we would have had to leave Colorado, and we loved Colorado, or take a severance. And I decided to take the severance and use that as a way of getting back into real estate, because now I had some income and a runway to do it, and that's been the best thing ever since. So yeah, so it's a combination of all those that helped me get through it.
By the way, speaking of marathon, how many marathons have you done so far?
I've done 13 now, and
Wow.
yeah, thank you. The most exciting piece of that is in March I ran the Tokyo Marathon, and that was they have these 6 world majors where you run the 6 biggest marathons around the world, and that was my last one. So I've now been able to run all of the 6 world majors, which was really cool.
Wow.
My family's joined me for that, so yeah, that was
That's
really special.
impressive. Congrats.
Thank you.
So, is there anything that you would compare between entrepreneurship and marathon in general? Any
Yeah,
similarities?
yeah, everything. I think again, you can go and learn entrepreneurship. I've learned the best entrepreneurs I've ever met, they don't have great educations, formal educations, right? They just do
Right.
it. And you even think
Uh-huh.
about like even the big names that we know, like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like they're obviously incredible entrepreneurs, but they dropped out of high school. I mean, out of college too. Even though it was a different level, they still dropped out and formed these companies. Um, but some of the more impressive ones are the ones that don't even have an education, and they just do it. They have a hustle about them. They understand
Mhm.
business at a very basic level. Basically, buy low, sell high is what it comes down to, whether it's a service or a product. But they all learn to educate themselves along the way by either finding mentors or going and taking classes or whatever, in everything else that comes with business, right? Like the accounting, finance, what have you. What's really, I think, sets a lot of people apart is all of the other intangibles that you can learn, but you don't learn them through formal education. You learn them through life. Maybe you have it innately within you. Things like learning to just get up, fail, and embrace failure, to learn from it, and get up and do it again, right? And apply the lessons you learned from the last failure. You know, Running taught me that. You get injuries, but you have goals, and you decide, hey, I still want to. I have this goal. I got to get in there. So, injury is a failure if in a when you're kind of comparing it. But if you learn to accept it as a lesson that's teaching you, hey, there's something you're not doing to keep your body in great shape, and that's why your body's giving you this injury. Maybe you're not doing the core work. Maybe you're not doing all the easy running and only workouts, or you're running too much, or you're not recovering, or all these things. They're all it's all those failures that have lessons in them that they're teaching you, and you got to diagnose them and figure out what they are, and then get back up and go at it. Perseverance, right? Time management, um, adaptability, focus, mindfulness, just staying in the moment, present. These are all things I learned through running, that I apply to entrepreneurship, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if I want to get into a marathon, do you recommend starting with a half marathon first?
I get asked that question. I don't know. I think I actually just recommend going for what you want. Everybody says start small. I
Right.
actually started with the marathon. That was my goal. I did run a 5K before that in a lot of smaller races along the way, more as kind of what we call tune-ups. You right where you want to see how you're doing at that point in time, so you know how you have to adjust. So, but I'm a big believer in setting big goals and then working them backwards. So if you think you want to get into marathoning, pick a marathon, set the date, be realistic about it, right? If you don't run it all right now, make it a year out from now, and then work it backwards. That means that you probably want to run a half marathon 6 months from now, and maybe a 5K 3 months from now. You know what I mean? Things like that. But I think it's much more exciting when you have a bigger goal to go for than a little one. But that's just me. Some people want to baby step it the whole way, and that's okay, right? Yeah.
Awesome. So, Luis, if somebody wants to get into real estate, has never done real estate, doesn't have any big experience or knowledge about that, what do you, and I know that's a very broad question in terms of, okay, how much money do they have? What are their skills? But generally speaking, what would your advice be for someone that wants to get into real estate and, just getting started?
Yeah. I would first try to figure out how you want to get into real estate. Like in what way, right? There's a lot of different ways you can get into it. Real estate can be sexy, especially when it's doing well, and people want to get into it as an asset class. But I would look at: do you want to get in as a real estate agent, or do you want to get in as an investor?
As an
If you want to
investor.
get into as an investor, yeah, I would look at. I would probably find some mentors first. Figure out the more you can figure out in advance, the better. So, like, what is the asset class you want? Do you want multifamily or single family or retail buildings or warehouses? What do you want to be in a
Let's
certain
say,
location?
let's say single family versus multifamily. What, you know, which one would you recommend and why?
Yeah, they both have advantages and disadvantages. So I can't really recommend one or the other. I'm in both. I think I that's what I prefer because it's what I know best as well. And I think housing is a basic human need. It's one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so that'll always be necessary. It seems like there'll always be a growing demand for it too. I think there's big differences with residential. You have just single family houses. You have appreciation is dictated differently than multifamily. Multifamily is a commercial asset, and its value is dictated by its income only. So if you can drive the income up, then you drive in the value up. Single family, you can buy a single family house and it can appreciate just because everybody falls in love with that neighborhood. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, it's a neighborhood that gets discovered, and it doubles in a couple of years. Or, in Denver, we had like 3 or 4 years in a row where it was 20+% appreciation every year. It was insane, right? Because it kind of got discovered. Tampa has been going through that. I think you guys are slowing down now, but there's certain markets that they become hot and they just take off. You know, so you can have much more appreciation with single family when you have that than with multifamily. But then at the same time, there's more management. It's easier to take care of one roof for 20 units than it is, 20 roofs for 20 units, right? So it just depends on what you want to do. And this is something that I offer, by the way. I have a company. It's called Pioneer Group Realty. And part of what I do is consult with people who want to get into investing. We come up with an investment thesis for them, and we kind of look at their life and what their risk tolerance is and everything, and then develop a plan from there, right? So some people might want to be just completely hands off, but they want to own the asset. So maybe you want to get like triple net commercial real estate, retail real estate, or maybe they just want to lend money, or they just want to get into a syndication to be a piece of a really big property, or they just want to have a few single family houses that they hold on to pay for their kids' college in 20 years. So I think if you approach it with that perspective, like you do with a good wealth advisor early on, then to figure out what your goals and your risk tolerance is and all that, then it becomes then we can set a good path, for you.
Is it fair to say multifamily is more calculated risk because let's say you have one tenant leaving one of your houses, then you're not losing the entire income. Let's say it's a
That's right.
fourplex, you still have three other tenants paying rent versus if you have a single family home and your tenant leaves, now you're left out there with the home and no rent, no income.
Yeah. That's correct. Absolutely. I think your risk is mitigated more with the more units, right? The more units you have, the more you can afford to absorb a vacancy, right? In a single family, it goes vacant, you have 100% vacancy, right? In a 10 unit, one goes vacant, you only have 10% vacancy. So that helps you still have income, no matter what. Yeah, that definitely helps. Interesting thing about what you said about fourplex, what a lot of people don't know is a fourplex, anything from 1 to 4 units is actually still considered residential, and it's treated by lenders just like it is for a single family house. So one of the great hacks people can do when they're first starting out, and I recommend this to a lot of young people, is go buy a fourplex. And don't worry about the number so much, as long as it takes care of itself, and you'll have to meet your debt service coverage ratios for the bank and what have you. But you can live in one unit and then rent out the other three, and you're able to get in just like you're able to get in when you buy your first house, which is like you can get in with an FHA loan, which is as little as 3.5% down, and the rates right now are lower than conventional, and so that you get a lower interest rate, you get in with less money, and you have everybody else paying your rent, and you can do that. It's a great way to get started. I think a young person who gets out of college and goes and does that a few times are setting themselves out to be set for life by the time they're 30 if they do that a few times. I'm a big believer in that. So I'm trying to get my kids to do. It's a great hack. Now, after 4 units, it's commercial, so it's a whole different ball game. The way it's financed and the way it's treated. So, yeah.
Is it usually speaking harder, or I'm not sure if that's the right way to describe it, but is it harder or more difficult or easier to get it financed if it's fourplex plus, or it's residential, which is considered fourplex and less?
Yeah. Again, 1 to 4plex is residential. So so 5 and up, 5 plus is commercial. Is it easier? Look, I think the easiest financing is always for your own personal home. If you have good credit and a good job, that's always going to be the easiest because you can get in with the least amount of money and the rates are always the lowest. You can always when you go and get a commercial loan, the rates are typically 1 to 2 points higher than a traditional residential, even more sometimes, right? So that's always easiest, in my opinion.
Gotcha.
Somebody else might say different, but
if you have a fourplex and you decide to sell them up one by one, would you be able to do that? Sell them individually to 4 people?
Yeah. So that's all determined at the local municipality. So every state, every town within a state, they all have different rules that allow for that. But typically, typically the answer, it's going to come down to zoning, right? If you take a multifamily and you start dividing it into, you're actually subdividing them into single units when you do that. So
Mm-hmm.
so that would require you to, go through the whole subdivision process with the local jurisdiction. And some towns are easier than not. Okay. So I don't know how it is like in Tampa. I have no idea. There's towns here where people do that. Um, we have a neighborhood, Wheat Ridge, Colorado. I have a good friend who that's all he does. He looks for 2 to 4 plexes, buys them, starts working on the subdivision process on day one, and sells them individually as condos, or
Mm-hmm.
with what we call party wall agreements here. And he's done very well. He's a young guy too, and he's done very well just doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a great strategy but it doesn't apply everywhere. You have to look into your local code and
Gotcha.
see if they'll allow it.
I was talking to a friend of mine who is a big real estate guy here in Switzerland, and he was telling me, "Hey, man," and he's a very smart guy actually, and he was telling me, "Hey, with what's going on in commercial real estate, like office building, not necessarily office buildings, but in general, not residential, commercial buildings in the U.S." He said one thing I would look at is if anyone would want to get into real estate is getting them rezoned and then basically creating residential units and then either selling them or renting them. What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on. That was a very popular thesis when office has been really hurting for the last few years.
Right.
We were overbuilt, and then we're underbuilt on residential, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's a very common thesis that a lot of people have looked at. It's often easier said than done. It really depends on the building, because some buildings, the way they were built, um, like for example, you have here in Denver, you have a lot of office buildings from like the 50s to about the 70s where each floor had a central bathroom. So around the
Mm-hmm.
perimeter, you had all of the offices, and then you had one bathroom in the middle, right? Or two, right? A men's and women's bathroom in the middle. So all the plumbing came up through the middle. And if you
Mm-hmm.
want to have turn them into apartments, that creates a lot of it's very structurally, it's very difficult to split that up and create more bathrooms to make the units, um, each have their own bathrooms and kitchens. So it depends on the building. I think a lot of cities are all for that, but
Mm-hmm.
um, what I've in a lot of the panels I've attended and developers I work with, they say it's very difficult to find a building that lends itself to that affordably. Oftentimes, it's just easier to scrape and just start from scratch. But
Right.
so it depends. I do know people who've done it though and done it successfully. So you
Mm.
just really have to look at the building.
Do you personally think moving forward we will have less demand for office buildings and more demand for residential buildings?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I'm probably a bit of a contrarian on this. I think all real estate is cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I faced the worst residential housing crisis this country's ever seen in 2008. And I swore r- houses would never come back, they'd never appreciate. This real estate was over, right? And I stayed out of the market with that thinking, and which was a big mistake. And then obviously it came back. And I don't think anything will ever um after that, I just became a big believer that everything comes back. Everything is cyclical in real estate. So office, I believe that we've seen the bottom of office. Work from home, all of that. You already see a lot of companies that are asking, they're demanding that their people come back to the office.
Mm-hmm.
There is something about working alongside people where there's just more innovation, right? You brainstorm all those conversations next to each other. You solve problems together. I have a company in the luxury. Uh, it's a luxury short vacation rental business in Vail, Colorado, and I have a chief marketing officer who he's a virtual assistant. We're all virtual. The whole team is virtual, but he doesn't even want to come in on our meetings to when we just talk about what everybody's doing. And because of that, there's no innovation coming from his side of the house. And we just had to have a talk about this because I'm like, when we are presenting problems in the area of pricing or just general operations and how that could affect sales and marketing and vice versa, I think that's a problem, right? So I think we need to bring people together. And so I do think office will come back. I just think it's going to be different in the way it comes back. So that's one thing.
How different would it be?
Well, I don't know. I think that there's going to be more co-working space. I think that's going to continue to grow. Your WeWork type of places. WeWork never really died. I thought it would. It went bankrupt. Like I don't know how, but here in Denver, you have co-working spaces all over. You got a lot of places that get converted to co-work. They're very popular, and even people who have big houses with lots of room. They still go and rent them. They want to be out and they want to be around people. Human beings need connection, So I think that's one area. And then I think that the office, for corporate offices themselves are going to be much more, I think they're going to force more integration, meaning they're going to, they're not going to be siloed little offices everywhere like those old office buildings of the 50s were built. They're going to be more open so that people have to interact with each other. That's what I think. And I think there'll be more emphasis on boardrooms. Quite frankly, when I was looking at an office space and really my number one priority was to have a good boardroom. I just think that there's something about when people come together around the table and solve problems together that's just magical. You get in there and people are going, they're ready to fight, right? Over a negotiation, all that. And then they come together and they solve, before you know it, they all are working towards the same thing together. They all realize they're aligned and they start to find solutions together. And so I think boardrooms are really important. I'm not a designer. I don't really follow this. These are just my hunches, right? So, and then I do want to go back to you asking about multifamily. I think again right now, a few years ago, about in the last 5 to 3 years ago, it was very easy to get money for development. Any bank would give you money to build a multifamily building. So you had all of these people who got money for that, and now they're delivering. So now, like here in Denver, for example, and I think this is a trend throughout the country, we have the most multifamily units being delivered to the market in like within the next 3 years in history. I think this year we're delivering. Man, it's been a long time since I've been to these panels, but I think it's something like 30,000 this year, and it's only going to go up for the next couple of years. So, we were, for a while, Denver was getting about 100,000 new residents a year. That's going to allow for us to absorb it. Now the population increase has declined and we flattened out, but I think, I think all of these deliveries are going to actually allow for, there's going to be a glut for a little while, but over the long term, I don't know. That could change over the long term. I think we're going to have a dip in multifamily, slow down because there's going to be too much supply hits flooding the market in the next 2 to 3 years, and then but over the long term, I think that'll come back. I think people will gravitate towards the cities, and it will be cities. I don't think the rural or suburb will, like people thought during COVID, they're going to run away to. At the end of the day, I think people still congregate in cities. It's where the big jobs are, and that's what people go to. I think over the long term, the cities that are most attractive, that are setting themselves up well for the future, that overabundance in deliveries now will make them affordable again and pull people back in. So I think Denver will be there. I think Tampa will continue to be there. Phoenix. There's a bunch of cities there that just you're going to see the trends just go back to normal. because of that.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that absolutely. And having seen and experienced what's going on in Tampa, I also believe that young families, young professionals always would want to move to areas where they can afford housing, but also gives them this kind of you know not big city life, but kind of they're close to a city. It's
That's right.
kind of a city that they have nice restaurants and activities that they can do with their families. That at least that's what I've been experiencing in Tampa.
I totally agree. Yeah. I would say basically follow the jobs. So when you have your
Right.
big employers put in lots of big jobs, then everything else will fall into place. The population will follow that. It's the history of the world. Why do people immigrate from Colombia to the United States? Because they're looking for good jobs. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And we do that within the United States ourselves,
Hmm.
So then it becomes a balance of the good jobs with a good quality of life. Where are you going to
Hmm.
find both? Right. And I think cities like a Tampa, like a Denver, provide great quality of life uh, and great jobs, you know? So Denver has become a little bit more, I think we don't have the big gains because the cost of living has gone up so much that the jobs aren't paying what people need to afford to live here. But again, I think that'll reverse a little bit um,
Right.
because the jobs that do come here are very high paying, and I think housing will be mitigated because of the supply that's coming on the market a little bit. But
Hmm.
a lot of people won't agree with me on that, so I could be wrong. Everybody seems to argue that we just don't have enough inventory. Um, but I heard the same argument in 2008 or prior to
Hmm.
2008. And then 2008, you could find houses anywhere you wanted for it. And I'm already starting to see that trend develop. Right. So,
I see. I see.
yeah.
So, Luis, you sound like someone who is really tuned in professionally, but also you seem like someone who is really rooted and connected emotionally, or I would say emotionally. I don't want to call it spiritually, but
Hmm.
and you have been through a lot. You have experienced so many things in your life. If somebody is listening to us discussing and is like, yeah, Luis, everything sounds about right, what you say, but I don't know my way. I need to find my way. What would your advice be to someone maybe who is a bit younger and wants to find their way?
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's a big reason why I started the Wayfinder show. So uh, yeah, I honestly feel like I'm still finding my way. I don't think
Mm,
it ever, life is a journey. Once you accept that, and you realize there's no final destination. Well, there is a final destination, but we don't have to worry about it after that. Once we hit it, it's gone. Life is gone. So in the meantime, just keep at your journey and improving and getting better and giving back to society and helping others, inspiring others. I think that life becomes pretty great, and so I'm constantly on that journey myself now. I accept things as they are and go after certain things, but I'm always prepared to pivot and I look forward to learning from others. So that's why I have my podcast. The Wayfinder Show is there for me to meet other interesting people who I can share the conversations with the world, just like you're doing, that hopefully people get inspired and learn from. Sometimes that might be their stories, which I particularly love people's stories and their journeys and hearing about them. I get a lot from that. But sometimes it's just subject matter expertise, right? Finding somebody on emotional intelligence and talking to them about how they can develop that, right? We've had people, experts to talk to about how to have better relationships with our loved ones, whether it be our kids or or our parents or our spouses. How to do better at negotiating, how to, in business or in life, whatever it may be. So I kind of take it as it comes. Whatever I'm curious about, I look for guests there, and I figured if I'm curious, and some other people will be as well. But I think that's a great way of, finding your way. I'm sure you've experienced the same with your podcast.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So, Luis, it's been a great conversation with you. I really enjoyed every second of it. It's like I've been talking to
Thank you.
someone who I've known for a long time. So, thank you for taking the time and coming on.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, please tell our guests and our audience where they can find you. Obviously, we will link you up in the show notes, but tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. I've also really enjoyed this. This has been great, and I hope we build a relationship well beyond this show. You can find me. The Wayfinder Show is a podcast found everywhere: Spotify, YouTube, Apple, all the other podcast providers. We have our website is just wayfindershow.com. Then my real estate practice is just called Pioneer Group Realty. The website is pioneergrouprealty.com. If anybody wants to talk more about that, about realty, I offer, there's a button on there and they can schedule a free 15-minute consultation with me. And if there's any way I can help them further from there, I'm happy to, discuss that from there. But I love figuring out strategies with people and setting them on their way. Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, Luis, definitely we will keep the connection up between us and perhaps meet in person one day. And once again, thank you for coming on, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.